Welcome back to Negotiation Tactics. Last week we spent a lot of time talking about reframing positions to interest. This week I'm going to stress the importance of taking your time with thoroughly identifying as many interests as possible. There is no need to rush a win-win negotiation. There's great value in information gathering. So take your time, and this week I'm going to show you some of the benefits that can be realized if you have taken your time to thoroughly, carefully identify as many interests as possible. Let me turn to this week's PowerPoint, and it's going to stress the importance and power of interest identification. Now, I actually was asked to mediate. It's been over 20 years ago, thank God, but a potential going postal situation with a federal agency who had just terminated a long-term employee who wrestled with mental illness, was a Vietnam vet, and had a very scary love of weapons. I am going to be explaining with my PowerPoint how we were able to divert and resolve that going postal situation. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, if you would. First of all, Neil Rackham, labor management research that I introduced to you, goes on to say the best negotiators zealously sought and identified common ground. And common ground are interests shared by the negotiators. Now, this is one of the reasons you want to be thorough and in-depth with identification of very specific interests. Don't try to, group them, summarize them, create small, short lists, because you are more likely to identify shared interests if you've got a lot of them. Now, Yale psychologist Morton Deutsch, many years ago, this was during segregated times in my childhood when we were having racial riots, and I don't know how many of you lived through that time with me. But he was asking at Yale, how can we decrease racial conflict? Now, obviously, one of the answers was to end segregation, to increase a positive society for all human beings. But he was a psychologist at a university doing his research. And what he discovered was that if different racial groups, if conflicting groups who view themselves as quite different, distinct from each other, are able to discover cross ties, that's another word for shared interests, common ground, or come together to work on shared goals together, their conflict goes down. Now, I have seen the power of this in my experience as a mediator. And generally, when you work as a professional mediator who's paid several $100s an hour by conflicted parties, as I did full-time in Boulder, Colorado many years ago, and I still do part-time on request, you will have clients who generally are very stuck in their conflict. Most human beings are not going to pay that kind of money if they're able to find a way to work out their conflict without you. And what I discovered with my very angry, for example, divorcing parents, or my very emotional business partners who had dissolved their business, and even in my going postal situation mediation, is that the climate of the room dramatically changes when parties see. And I'm going to stress that because in mediation it's important you have visuals. see that they actually share something in common. I mean, if you can imagine very angry people coming into the room, not having any hope, they've never had a mediation before in their life, they have no hope that you're actually going to help them, but maybe the court has told them they need to give it a try. Maybe they've spent thousands of dollars on divorce attorneys. So they're willing to see. But they really do not believe. I mean, they may not even be willing to look at each other or to talk to each other because they're so angry and bitter. So after going through the initial foundational storytelling process and discovering that their mediator has actually understood them and helped them identify something they have in common, it can be quite shocking for parties. The same will happen with win-win negotiation if your other negotiators really don't have faith that win-win actually ever occurs in this world. What you need to do to be able to, help facilitate, navigate this miracle is start to discipline yourself to notice and find similarities, no matter who the other person is. And especially if there is cultural, gender, or other difference. Can you still find similarity? Can you still bridge difference with common ground? It's a wonderful practice to start as a student of NCRP. Now, Rackham's best negotiators actually zealously sought common ground to a very particular end. They also zealously, and zealous is a litigation lawyer term if you're not familiar with it. It comes from the legal code of ethics, zealous representation of clients. But they also zealously sought to create options for mutual gain. Both are important disciplines. And I'm going to lead you in a tool that works really well in generating options, ideas for mutual gain. You create collaborative win-win questions, open-ended questions to stimulate ideas for mutual gain. And you can easily do this. Now, hopefully you've studied open-ended questions rather than, closed, which are answered with a mere yes, no. Open-ended stimulate ideas and encourage information sharing. If you haven't yet studied them, please, take some time to Google and get familiar with them. But they can easily be created using interests, especially if you take a shared interest. You can easily frame a question, how can we save money? And that starts to stimulate all negotiators' ideas for how you might save money. You can also do it, you don't need to do it with shared interests. You take an interest from every negotiator and you put it together in an open-ended question. So how can we honor this negotiator's interest and this negotiator's interest? I have decided to frame another common question for stimulating ideas. How can we honor, and you put in the interests of all negotiators in the most cost-effective way. This will help stimulate ideas as well. Now, remember, Neil Rackham found that the best negotiators, as compared to mediocre and poor, asked 2 to 3 times more questions. So getting in the habit of framing and asking questions is a core best negotiator skill. Here's one, a practical class example if you want to play around in class. How can we help each other excel in NCR522? I think that's enough for this week. I am going to be leading you step by step through this process. Now, you're not going to find framing of collaborative win-win questions in your Harvard negotiation projects. This is from my own practice, and especially my practice as a mediator, but I think you will find It works beautifully with preparing for the next step that we will be reviewing next week. Have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you then.